I've always believed life in my mid-50s would be predictably mornings with black coffee, the hum of my old Ford pickup as I drove to work, an evening spent reading in the worn recliner my late wife Emily picked out 20 years ago. My name's Michael Harrington, and until last November, the most excitement I had was when my grocery coupon saved me more than $10 in one trip. I live in a modest 2-bedroom ranch just outside Columbus, Ohio, and work as an accountant at a local freight company. My family's a mixed bag. My younger sister Karen is married to Dr. Philip Turner, a successful dentist with a taste for luxury. My older brother Ron is a charming drifter who changes jobs and girlfriends faster than most people change oil. My stepfather Ed, married to my mother Patricia, never hid the fact he didn't see me as his responsibility. Then there's Aunt Louise, my mother's sister, retired school librarian, who has lived simply all her life, but has always been the one person I could count on. And here's the thing. Every Friday, I buy a $20 set of lottery tickets at my corner gas station. My siblings call it a waste. My stepfather calls it taxes for the mathematically challenged. But a single ticket on an ordinary night was about to change everything I thought I knew about money, family, and trust. That Friday night started out like every other, cold, quiet, and uneventful. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the loose siding on the garage, and I decided to heat up a bowl of leftover chili instead of cooking. I kicked off my boots, settled into my recliner, and let the hum of the TV fill the room while the local news droned on in the background. On the coffee table sat the small stack of lottery tickets I'd bought earlier that day from Marty's Gas and Go. Marty had grinned as he handed me my tickets. He's joking. "Hey, Mike, one of these days you're going to hit it big and forget all about us little people." I'd laughed and told him I'd buy him a new coffee machine if that ever happened. After dinner, I half-heartedly flipped through channels, not even remembering the drawing was scheduled for that night. It wasn't until nearly 9:30, when a rerun of Columbo was interrupted by the lottery numbers scrolling across the bottom of the screen, that I reached for my tickets. The first number matched. I smiled a little. It happened sometimes nothing unusual. The second matched, and the third. By the fourth, my pulse had kicked up like I'd just jogged across the yard. I was sitting bolt upright, the pen I'd been holding clattering to the floor. The fifth number matched, and now I was holding my breath. When the sixth number appeared, I didn't even exhale. Just stared. All six. Every single one. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the ticket. I grabbed my reading glasses, double-checked against the website, and even rewound the televised drawing to make sure my tired eyes weren't playing tricks. But there it was, 6 perfect matches. The jackpot was $47 million. It's after taxes, about $28 million. I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound in the house. For a man who'd spent the better part of his adult life figuring out how to stretch a paycheck, that number was almost incomprehensible. I thought about my mortgage, the medical bills from Emily's last hospital stay, the truck that needed a new transmission, and the slow drip in the kitchen sink I'd been ignoring. All of it could be taken care of with a single check, but just as quickly as excitement came, a knot formed in my stomach. I'd read too many stories of ordinary folks winning the lottery only to have their lives torn apart by long lost relatives, friends with sob stories, and people who saw them as nothing but a walking ATM. I'd seen smaller-scale versions of it in my own life. The Christmas, when Karen borrowed money for a surprise trip to Hawaii, promising she'd pay it back in the spring, she never did. The time Ron showed up with a hard luck story about needing rent money just until the union job starts, and then vanished for months. Even Ed, who claimed he was too old for handouts, hadn't minded when I paid to fix the furnace. At Mom's house, one particularly brutal January. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with the winning ticket in front of me and my mind racing. Should I call someone? Tell Marty? Tell Aunt Louise? By 3 a.m., I had my answer. No one, at least not yet. By sunrise, I'd already made an appointment. With David McClure, an estate attorney in downtown Columbus. I'd met him years ago through a client, and he'd once helped a small business owner set up a trust. When I walked into his office that Monday morning with my ticket tucked inside an envelope, I felt like an imposter, just an aging accountant in a flannel shirt and worn leather boots, about to talk millions. David didn't waste time with small talk. When I slid the ticket across his polished desk, his eyebrows went up, but his voice stayed calm. "Well, Mr. Harrington, you've just changed the rest of your life." Over the next 2 hours, he laid out my options. Ohio law allowed winners to claim their prize through a blind trust, keeping their names out of public record. He explained taxes, investment strategies, and the importance of building a team financial advisor, CPA attorney, to guard the money and, just as importantly, guard me from the chaos that could follow. As I left his office, my head was spinning, not just from the numbers, but from the weight of the decision I'd made. I was rich now, richer than I'd ever dreamed. And yet not Karen, not Ron, not even Aunt Louise would know. At least not until I decided they deserved to. And deep down, I had a feeling that deserve would have to be proven. Walking out of David McClure's office that day, I should have been floating on air. I had enough money to pay off my mortgage. 10 times over to buy a new truck, to never work another day if I didn't want to. But instead, my thoughts drifted to the people who shared my last name and what history had taught me about their relationship with money. If you grew up like I did, you learn early who in your family you can lean on, and who will lean on you until you fall over. In mine, the pattern had been clear for decades. Take my younger sister, Karen. On the surface, she's the picture of success, married to Dr. Philip Turner, one of the best-known dentists in the county, living in a house with more square footage than they know what to do with. But I'll never forget the Christmas she pulled me aside looking teary-eyed and asked to borrow $3,000 for a short-term emergency. She swore she'd pay it back by April. That was 8 years ago. The only thing I got in April was a postcard from Maui, where she and Philip had gone on vacation. She never mentioned the debt again. Then there's my older brother. Ron, charming as they come, can talk his way into a job, a relationship, or a loan with equal ease. The problem is, he can't keep any of them. He's drifted from construction work to bartending to selling cars, always promising that the next gig is the big one. I've lost track of how many times he's called me with that well-practiced "things are just rough right now" tone. Each time I sent what I could, and each time the payback never came. He's the kind of man who, if you spotted him $20, you'd be lucky to get a thank you, let alone repayment. My mother, Patricia, remarried after my dad passed. My stepfather, Ed, is a retired machinist who prides himself on never taking a dime from anybody. What that really means is, he never takes a dime unless it's hidden inside a family favor he can justify. A few years back, their furnace went out in the middle of January. Ed called me, saying it would be nice if I could help Mom get it fixed, since she shouldn't have to suffer. I paid the repair bill without a second thought. A week later, I found out they'd gone on a weekend getaway to Nashville's idea of celebrating their good luck that the furnace was working again. Even my late wife, Emily, had spotted the pattern. She'd quietly warned me when she saw a familiar number pop up on caller ID, knowing it meant someone was about to ask for a little help until payday. The only person who never made me feel used was Aunt Louise, Mom's younger sister. She's lived her whole life on a librarian's salary, tucked away in a small bungalow with creaky floors and books stacked in every corner. Louise never had much, but she always showed up, whether it was bringing me homemade soup when I had the flu or sitting with Emily during her chemo treatments. So I could grab a shower and change clothes. She'd never asked me for a dime, not once, even when I knew she could have used it. It's funny, when you've been burned enough times, you start expecting it. That's why the idea of telling any of them about my lottery win made my stomach tighten. I could already picture the conversations, Karen's sweet voice turning syrupy as she mentioned just a little help with a kitchen renovation. Ron promising to pay me back once his can't-miss investment paid off. Ed making some backhanded comment about how family takes care of family, while hinting at a fishing trip he'd been eyeing that night, sitting in my recliner. With the ticket locked away in my desk drawer, I started to realize this win wasn't just about money. It was about control. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anything from them, not their approval, not their help, not even their Good opinion. And that meant I could decide once and for all who would be part of my future and who would stay in my past. But before I made that decision, I needed to be sure. I needed proof, clear, undeniable proof of who they really were when there was nothing in it for them. And that's when the idea came to me. I'd give them all the perfect chance to show their true colors. The weekend after I claimed the winning ticket was one of the longest of my life. You'd think $28 million in the bank would make a man sleep like a baby. Instead, I found myself waking up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, running through 1,000 what-ifs. What if Ron found out? I'd never hear the end of his once-in-a-lifetime business opportunities. What if Karen knew? She'd be at my door with Pinterest boards full of home upgrades she just needed a little help with, and he'd turn it into a morality lesson about how I was obligated to share with family because that's what good people do. The truth is, I'd already seen what money, even small amounts, did to people I loved. I'd watched relationships sour over a couple $100. I'd been ghosted after handing over rent money I couldn't really afford to give. I'd been made to feel guilty for saying no, even when I had my own bills stacked on the kitchen counter. If this was how they behaved when the stakes were low, what would happen if they knew I had millions? So I made the only decision that felt safe. I wouldn't tell a soul. Not Karen, not Ron, not even Aunt Louise, not yet. The following Monday, I sat down with David McClure again, and we mapped out a plan. The first step was setting up a blind trust to claim the winnings quietly. You want to control the narrative? He said, leaning back in his leather chair. Once your name's public, it's not just family. You'll have strangers at your door, charity requests in your mailbox, and people calling in favors you didn't know you owed. We opened multiple accounts, one for personal expenses, one for investments, and a separate one earmarked for charitable giving down the line. David connected me with a financial advisor and a CPA who'd worked with high-net-worth clients before. Between the three of them, they built a fortress around my money that not even the most persistent relative could breach without my permission. I kept my day job at the freight company, even though I could have walked away that afternoon. Quitting too fast would raise eyebrows, and I wasn't ready for questions I couldn't answer. Besides, there was something satisfying about knowing I didn't have to be there if I didn't want to be. I wasn't working for survival anymore. I was working because I chose to. But while my bank account was secure, my mind wasn't at ease. I kept circling back to one problem: trust. It's easy to say I know who my people are, but the truth is, until the chips are down, you don't really know. And after years of being the one everyone came to for help, I couldn't shake the need to know if the tables were turned, would they be there for me? That question gnawed at me. I thought about the years after Emily passed, when the house felt too quiet and how few people actually checked in. I thought about the nights I'd skip dinner to make a loan payment for someone else, only to get a casual thanks and no repayment. I thought about Louise, who never had much, but would show up with a pot roast and a kind word without being asked. It was one thing to suspect my siblings and stepfather saw me as a resource. It was another thing to prove it. Proof meant I could stop second-guessing, stop wondering if I was being unfair, and start making decisions about my future, my real future, with a clear head. By Thursday, the idea had taken root. I'd tell them I'd lost my job, that I was in a bind $6,000 short on covering my mortgage and some unexpected medical expenses until I found new work. It was enough to sting, but not impossible for them to help if they wanted to. The beauty of it was in the simplicity. Same story to each person, no one knowing I'd said the same thing to the others. I'd ask once, then watch what they did. No second chances, no excuses. I knew it wasn't exactly the kind of thing you read about in self-help books. But I also knew this. When it comes to family and money, sometimes the only way to find the truth is to test it. By the time Friday rolled around, the plan was no longer just an idea rattling around in my head. It was a blueprint. I'd written it out in a spiral notebook, the same kind I'd used back in high school, each page neat and deliberate. I'd call it my ledger of loyalty, though the truth was, I already had a pretty good guess at what the balance would be. The story I'd settled on was simple. The freight company had closed overnight after a federal investigation into shady accounting practices. I was left without a job, without my last paycheck, and with a stack of medical bills from some recent tests I didn't care to explain. I'd say I needed $6,000 to bridge the gap until I found new work. It was believable, maybe even relatable in this economy, and just uncomfortable enough to see who'd step up. David. McClure had made sure my real money was locked away tight. We'd created a modest personal account for day-to-day spending. So even if anyone got nosy, they wouldn't find anything unusual. The rest sat in investments and trust structures with more legal armor than Fort Knox. I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, making a list of names. Karen and Philip were at the top, followed by Ron, then Mom and Ed. Aunt Louise, of course. Then a few extended relatives who'd all, at some point, found their way to my doorstep when times were tough: Funkle Frank, Cousin Danny, and my mother's oldest friend, Shirley, who might as well be family. Next to each name, I jotted down my prediction. Karen. Offer sympathy, maybe a token amount, but claim bad timing because of some luxury purchase. Ron. Claim to be broke. Promise to make it up to me later, then disappear. Mom and Ed. A lecture about financial planning, followed by a polite but firm no Louise, likely to give what she could, even if it hurt her to do so. Frank. Possible small help, but with conditions. Danny. Empty promises. Shirley. A wild card. The key was consistency. Everyone would hear the exact same story, down to the last detail. I'd mention the company name, the federal investigation, the missing paycheck, the $6,000 gap. I'd make it clear this wasn't about a handout. It was a temporary loan I'd repay as soon as I was back on my feet. That Saturday afternoon, I tested the story on my old friend Tom just to make sure it sounded convincing. Tom, a retired firefighter with a knack for smelling out half-truths, listened carefully, then said, "Mike, if I didn't know you better, I'd believe you. You sound tired, a little embarrassed, but not desperate. People will buy it." "Good," I said. "That's what I want. Not trying to hustle anyone. I just want to see if they'd be there for me like I've been there for them."
Oh.
Shook his head slowly. "You might not like the answer you get. I already knew that. It wasn't about being liked, it was about being sure. I'd spent too many years second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being unfair when I felt used. This would end the guessing once and for all. By Sunday night, I had my notebook, my list, and a rough call schedule. I'd start with Karen and Philip on Monday morning. They were early risers. Then I'd move down the list over the next week. No simultaneous calls. No chance for them to compare notes too soon. I won't. Part of me felt guilty. Family isn't supposed to be tested like this, right? But the truth is, family had been testing me for years, just in a different way. Every time they asked for help, I passed with flying colors. Now it was their turn. Before bed, I opened the notebook one more time, looking at the empty columns where I'd write their responses. For the first time in a long while, I felt oddly calm. Whatever happened next, I'd have my answers in. That was worth more to me than the millions sitting quietly in the bank. Monday morning, 8:15 sharp, I dialed Karen. I could picture her in that marble-tiled kitchen, sipping coffee from a mug that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. She answered on the second ring, all cheer and brightness. "Mike, what a surprise. Everything okay?" I gave her the story. Word for word, the sudden company shutdown, the missing paycheck, the $6,000 shortfall. Her sympathy came fast and warm. "Mike, that's awful. I can't believe they'd just shut down like that. Are you sure there's nothing you can do legally?" When I told her I'd already checked and there was no recourse, I finally got to the ask. "Well," she said after a pause, "this is actually a terrible time for us. We just redid the kitchen, and Phil bought a new boat. Plus, we've got the property tax bill coming up." I could practically hear her turning the pages of her mental budget. "But let me talk to Phil," she added quickly. "Maybe we can help with part of it, or you could come stay here for a while. We've got the guest room well. It's full of storage right now, but we could clear it out." I thanked her and said I'd wait to hear back. She never called. Next up was Ron. I didn't even get the courtesy of a voice-to-voice conversation, just a text back after I laid out the story. Damn. Man, that sucks. Things are tight here too. I'll call you later. He never did. 2 more texts from me went unanswered. I tried calling once, and it went straight to voicemail. I didn't bother again. When I met Mom and Ed for lunch at their favorite diner on Wednesday, Ed dove right into his usual small-talk sports scores. Gas prices till I brought up the story. Mom's face softened. Ed's jaw tightened. "Mike," he said, his voice carrying that condescending tone he'd perfected. "This is exactly why you need a solid 6 months' expenses saved. I've told you that for years." Mom murmured, "We just bought the camper, honey. Things are stretched." Ed nodded like the judge delivering a verdict. "We can't dip into our retirement funds. It wouldn't be responsible. You'll figure it out. This'll be a good learning experience." Stirred my coffee and nodded, already knowing this chapter was closed. Uncle Frank took my call that night. Sounded concerned at first, then asked, "What are we talking about here?" "Loan. What's the interest rate?" I told him it was just until I found a new job. He said he'd think about it, then launched into a 15-minute story about his neighbor's leaky roof. We hung up with no decision, and I never heard back. Cousin Danny surprised me by saying, "I'll help if I can," but then admitted his help might have to wait until his big sports bet came through. I wished him luck and crossed his name off the list, and then there was Shirley. She listened, asked a few practical questions, and said she'd check her accounts. 2 days later, she called to say it wasn't possible right now because she was saving for a cruise. By the end of the week, my notebook told the story better than I ever could. Out of 7 people I'd reached so far, not one had offered real, immediate help. The closest was Karen's vague promise to talk to Phil, and that had evaporated without a trace. Each conversation played back in my mind like a movie I'd seen too many times, sympathy on the surface, excuses underneath, and always the pivot to their own needs. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I'll admit, it stung. Not because I needed the money, I had more than enough, but because the test confirmed what I'd suspected for years. When the well runs dry, some people don't come with buckets. They just wander off to the next source. Only one name remained. On my list that I hadn't called yet, Aunt Louise. Something told me her page in the ledger was going to look very different from the rest. I was planning to call Aunt Louise on Saturday morning, but Friday night, my phone rang and her name lit up the screen. "Mike, honey, Mom mentioned something about the freight company closing. Are you all right?" Her voice was warm and steady, the kind that made you want to take a deep breath. And tell the truth, I stuck to the script. I told her about the sudden shutdown, the missing paycheck, the gap I couldn't bridge. She listened without interrupting, except for the occasional soft hum that told me she was following every word. "Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow?" she asked. My treat. "We'll talk about it then." The next day we met at Millie's Diner, a place she'd been going since I was a kid. The vinyl booths were the same faded red, the coffee still strong enough to keep you awake through a double shift. She was already there when I arrived, a half-finished crossword puzzle in front of her. Reading glasses perched low on her nose, she stood to hug me. "You look tired, sweetheart. Sit down, let's get some food in you." We ordered meatloaf and mashed potatoes, her favorite, and talked about everything but my situation for the first 10 minutes. She asked about the weather, about the neighbor who'd been leaving his trash cans out too long, about the tomato plants in my garden. It was as if she knew I needed a moment to breathe before we got to the hard part. Finally, she folded her hands on the table. "Now, about this job business. I've been thinking, and I want you to take this." She reached into her purse and slid an envelope across the table. I could tell by the weight of it what was inside. "Louise, I don't argue with me. It's $3,500. I know it's not the full amount you need, but it should cover your mortgage for at least a month and a half. Maybe give you some breathing room." I opened my mouth to protest, but she cut me off with that librarian's tone that could hush a whole room. "Family helps family. Mike, I don't have much, but what I do have is yours if you need it." I tried again. A fixed income. You need this for yourself. She just smiled. I'll be fine. My arthritis pills aren't going anywhere, and if I have to pick up a few tutoring sessions to cover the difference, so be it. Besides, you've done enough for everyone else in this family over the years. Let someone help you for once. Then she did something no one else on that list had done. She offered more than money. If you need to save on expenses, my guest room is yours. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and you'd have your own bathroom. You could stay as long as you need, no rent, no strings attached. I felt a lump in my throat. I'd spent the last week hearing excuses, half-promises, and thinly veiled lectures. Here she was, with the least to spare, giving me almost everything she had without hesitation. We talked for another hour. She asked about my job search, offered to call a couple of old friends who still worked in the district office, and even brought up the idea of volunteering together at the library's adult literacy program. To keep busy while you figure things out. When we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, the envelope was still in my pocket, heavier than the cash it contained. It was heavy with meaning. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done with anyone else in this test. I opened my notebook and wrote more than just a verdict. Under her name I wrote, "Didn't wait to be asked." Offered nearly all she had. Offered a place to live. Genuine concern. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I didn't feel like I was running an experiment. I felt like I'd just been reminded what family was supposed to look like. I knew then that Louise's page in the ledger wasn't just going to be different. It was going to be the foundation for what came next. That Sunday afternoon, I called Aunt Louise and asked if she could come by for supper. Nothing fancy, I told her. Just roast chicken and green beans. I didn't mention that I'd been rehearsing what I was going to say all morning when she arrived. She carried a pea still warm from Millie's, because every Sunday meal should end with pie, she said. I poured her a cup of tea, and we sat in the living room while the chicken finished roasting. "Louise," I began, shifting in my chair. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I haven't told anyone else." She raised an eyebrow, but stayed quiet. "I didn't lose my job," I said, the words feeling heavier than I'd expected. "The company's fine. I'm still working there. That story I told you." It wasn't true. Her expression didn't harden like I feared it, just softened into something more curious than hurt. "All right," she said gently. So why the story?" I took a deep breath. I needed to know. After all the years of being the one who helps, I wanted to see who would be there for me if I needed help, and you were the only one who didn't hesitate. She sipped her tea and let that hang in the air a moment. "I'm not angry," she finally said. "Sad, maybe. Sad that you felt you had to test people to find out what you already knew in your gut, but I understand. I've learned that lesson myself." That's when she told me about her ex-husband, Robert, and how he'd taken the inheritance her grandmother left her, investing it in a doomed restaurant without her consent. "It taught me that some folks see you as a person, and some just see you as a resource," she said quietly. "Money shows you which is which." Her words felt like they'd been written for me. I took another deep breath. "There's more." I said, 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $47 million. For a moment, she just stared at me, eyes wide. Then she let out a breath and leaned back in her chair. "Oh, that explains the test. I haven't told a soul. Not Karen, not Ron, not Mom and Ed. I wanted to know who I could trust before I decided what to do. And you." I paused, my throat tightening. "You're the first person I wanted to tell." She reached over and patted my hand. "Don't need a dime from you. I've got my books, my little house, my garden. I'm happy. I just want you to be smart with a tan to be happy yourself." That's just it," I said. "I want to do something for you, whether you think you need it or not. You've been there for me when no one else was. I want to make sure you never have to worry about money or medical bills again." She shook her head with a smile. "You're as stubborn as your mother." "I've already spoken to my attorney," I continued. "I'm setting up a trust that will cover all your medical expenses for life. It'll also give you a comfortable monthly income so you can enjoy your retirement without scraping by, and I'd like to buy you a house. 1 floor, wide doorways, closer to me, so I can check in on you." Her eyes glistened, but she kept her voice steady. "If it will make you happy, I'll accept. But not because I need it, because it's important to you to give it." That was Louise in a nutshell. Gracious, dignified, never making it about the money. We ate dinner, then pie, talking about what kind of house she might like, and laughing over memories from when I was a kid. I was at the first time since I matched those 6 numbers. I felt the weight in my chest lift. That night, as I cleared the dishes, I realized something. The fortune sitting in my accounts. It didn't feel real until I used it to take care of someone who had taken care of me. Louise had passed my test without even knowing it, but more importantly, she'd reminded me why I'd wanted to protect this money in the first place. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it did the night I first checked those numbers. Sold my old ranch house and moved into a modest but beautiful home on the edge of a quiet neighborhood just outside Columbus. The backyard had a vegetable garden, a few apple trees, and a covered porch where I liked to drink my morning coffee. 3 blocks away, in a cozy craftsman with a wide front porch, lived Aunt Louise. I'd found the perfect one-floor home for her, roomy enough for her books and quilting supplies, but easy to manage. I'd made sure it had a sunny reading nook, because I knew that's where she'd spend most of her afternoons. She'd retired from tutoring, though she still volunteered at the library's literacy program 3 days a week. Her arthritis was easier to manage now that she had better medical care and less stress about paying for it. She never once treated me differently because of the money, something I couldn't say about most of my family. Speaking of them, our relationship with the rest of the clan had changed. It was polite but distant. We still had holiday dinners, exchanged birthday cards, and talked occasionally, but the closeness I used to imagine was gone. In its place was honesty. I didn't expect them to be there for me, and I didn't pretend anymore. When they had real emergencies, I sometimes helped anonymously through third parties, but I never revealed where the help came from. Meanwhile, the nonprofit I'd started, Neighbors in the Gap, had grown faster than I dared hope. Inspired by Louise, we provided companionship, home repairs, and small financial lifelines for elderly folks living alone. In our first year, we'd helped over 200 seniors across Franklin County, and we were expanding into 2 neighboring counties. The work gave me a sense of purpose my accounting job never had. It connected me to a community of people who cared for each other in ways my own family never could. One warm evening, Louise and I sat on her porch watching the sun sink low over the trees. She sipped her tea and looked over at me. She said, "If you'd told your family about the lottery right away, everything would be different now." I nodded. They'd be closer, or at least they'd pretend to be. But I'd never know what was real. "It's the thing," she said. "It's better to have the truth, even if it hurts, than to live in a pretty lie." She was right. The test I'd given them had been painful, but it had freed me from years of wondering. It showed me who would be there when I had nothing to give but myself, and that truth was worth more than the jackpot. Money doesn't change people, it just shows you who they've been all along. I spent most of my life thinking love meant always saying yes, always helping, even when it cost me. But real love, the kind Aunt Louise showed me, gives freely without keeping score and still respects your dignity and boundaries. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. The people who belong in your life are the ones who show up when you have nothing to offer but yourself. Those are the relationships worth protecting, with or without a lottery ticket. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation that revealed someone's true colors, good or bad? What did you learn from it? Share your story in the comments. If this story spoke to you, hit the like button. Subscribe for more real-life stories that might just change how you see the people around you. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. They might thank you for it later.